The one choice that haunts me, the one that keeps me sleepless, is deciding to work night shifts while leaving Sophie with James. That decision gnaws at my core, an unfixable mistake that consumes me endlessly. I replay it over and over, searching for the moment I should have known better. The moment I should have heeded her cries. The moment I should have truly listened to my 4-year-old daughter who pleaded with me every single night not to leave her alone. We were desperate for money. That's what I kept telling myself to justify it. The hospital paid night nurses better, and James had been laid off from his bookkeeping job at a local firm. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, just until he found another position. He said he was applying, but nothing ever came through. 6 months stretched into a full year of exhaustion. At first, Sophie seemed okay with the setup. She'd always been a daddy's girl, adoring James. But then something shifted in her demeanor. I can't pinpoint exactly when it began. Maybe 3 months into my night shifts? I'd be preparing to leave around 10 p.m. and Sophie would start sobbing uncontrollably. Not typical toddler tears, but gut-wrenching cries that made my chest physically ache with pain. She'd cling to my legs, screaming, "Mommy, don't go, stay with me. Please don't leave me with Daddy." Her voice was raw with desperation. James always had the same dismissive response. "She's just being dramatic. She calms down as soon as you're out the door. She's manipulating you for attention." And like a complete idiot, I believed him every time. I convinced myself it was just separation anxiety, as all the parenting blogs suggested it could be. I'd kneel down, look into her tear-filled eyes, and promise I'd be back by morning. I'd assure her that Daddy would take good care of her, that she was safe, but Sophie never believed me. Her tiny fingers would dig into my arms so hard they left red marks. Her face would turn a horrible shade of red from screaming. The last image I'd see before shutting the front door was James prying her off me, her small body thrashing in his grip as I walked away. Every single night. I started dreading going to work. I'd sit in my car in the driveway, crying for 10 minutes before forcing myself to drive to the hospital. My coworkers noticed how haggard I looked, how my eyes were always red. Lisa, another nurse on my floor, kept asking if everything was okay at home. I'd brush it off with a weak smile, saying, "Yeah, my kid's just going through a phase." But then Sophie started having accidents again, even though she'd been potty trained for over a year. She'd wake up screaming from nightmares she couldn't explain or describe. And she developed this new behavior where she'd hide in small spaces, under her bed, inside her closet, behind the living room couch. I'd find her curled up in these tight spots, just staring blankly, not playing or pretending, just hiding as if she was trying to disappear. I confronted James about it once, asking if anything happened during the nights that might be scaring her. He got instantly defensive, accusing me of implying he was a bad father. He said I was the one abandoning them every night to chase a paycheck. He twisted the conversation so quickly that my head spun, and I backed down because that's what I always did with James. Then, Sophie started getting bruises. Nothing dramatic, just small ones on her arms or legs. James always had a ready explanation. She fell off the swing at the park. She bumped into the coffee table. She was playing too rough with the neighbor's kid. I'm a nurse. I should have recognized the pattern. I should have known better than to accept his excuses. But I was so tired all the time, working 12-hour shifts, trying to be a mom during the day, struggling to keep our family from falling apart. I just let myself believe him because the alternative was too terrifying to even consider. But 3 weeks ago, Sophie started refusing to be alone with James at all, not just at night. If I stepped into the bathroom, she'd follow me. If I tried to run to the grocery store, she'd have a full-blown meltdown, screaming and clinging to me. She started sleeping in my bed during the day while I tried to catch a few hours of rest before work. One afternoon, while Sophie was napping beside me, James came into the bedroom and said we needed to talk about her behavior. He said she was becoming too dependent on me, that I was encouraging it by letting her sleep in our bed. He said he was going to start being stricter with her to fix it. Something in his tone made my skin crawl, like a warning I couldn't quite grasp. That night was the worst yet. Sophie literally made herself throw up from crying so hard when I tried to leave for work. She was screaming, "Don't leave me, Mommy, please don't leave me. He hurts me when you're gone. He hurts me." James grabbed her roughly and told her to stop lying. His face was unnatural, like he was smiling for my benefit, but his eyes were cold and empty, something else entirely. He told me to just go, that he'd handle it, that she was obviously overtired and making things up for attention. I almost stayed home. I almost called in sick to work. But we needed the money so badly, and I was already on thin ice for missing shifts earlier in the month. So I left. I left my baby girl screaming that her daddy hurt her, her voice echoing in my head as I drove away. I couldn't focus at work that night. I kept making small mistakes, dropping syringes, forgetting basic protocols. Lisa pulled me aside around 3 a.m. and told me to take a break in the staff room. I broke down completely and told her everything, the words spilling out like a flood. She listened quietly, then asked a question that changed everything. "Have you checked your nanny cam footage?" We had this baby monitor system that James had set up when Sophie was an infant. It was connected to our Wi-Fi and stored video in the cloud. I hadn't checked it in years because Sophie wasn't a baby anymore. Lisa's question hit me like a lightning bolt. I logged into the app right there in the hospital break room at 3:30 in the morning. my hand shaking so badly I could barely type my password. The camera was still in Sophie's room, pointed at her bed. The footage from that night showed her room empty at first. Then James brought her in. She was still crying, but quieter now, like she was exhausted from the effort. He put her in bed and just stood there, staring down at her for far too long, unmoving. Then he sat on the edge of her bed and started talking. I couldn't hear what he was saying because the sound was muted on the app, and I couldn't find my earbuds in my bag. But I could see Sophie's face. I could see her shrinking away from him, pressing her body against the wall as if she could escape. I could see James's hand reaching toward her, slow and deliberate. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I tried to turn the sound on, but my trembling fingers wouldn't cooperate. I watched as James leaned in closer to Sophie, his back to the camera now. She was crying again, shaking her head no over and over, her face contorted in fear. I watched him pull back the covers, and then the app crashed completely. My phone froze. I restarted it, but when I tried to log back in, it said my password was incorrect. I tried again and again, but nothing worked. I called our home phone, but no one answered. Lisa found me hyperventilating in the break room, my face wet with tears. She helped me calm down enough to think clearly. I called our neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, who had our spare key for emergencies. I asked her to go check on Sophie. 10 minutes later, she called back and said everything was fine. James answered the door, said Sophie was sleeping peacefully, and didn't want to wake her. He told her I was just being paranoid because I was overtired from my long shifts. I couldn't wait until morning. I left my shift early, driving home like a maniac, my heart racing. It was almost 5 a.m. when I got there. The house was dark and silent. James was asleep in our bed, snoring softly. I went straight to Sophie's room. Her bed was empty, the covers tossed aside. I frantically searched the house, checking all her hiding spots, under the furniture, in the closets. I finally found her in the guest bathroom tub, curled up with her favorite stuffed bunny, fast asleep. When I picked her up, she started screaming, her eyes wild with terror. It took several minutes to calm her down enough for her to realize it was me, not James. When she recognized me, she collapsed against my chest, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering, "Mommy," over and over like a mantra. I took her to my car, buckled her in, and drove straight to Lisa's apartment. She'd given me her address before I left the hospital, offering her spare room. Sophie fell back asleep in the car, exhausted. I carried her inside, and Lisa set us up in her guest room. I don't know what to do next. James has been calling nonstop, leaving voicemails saying he's worried sick about us. He's asking where we are, saying he'll call the police if we don't come home soon. He's claiming I've lost my mind, that I'm having some kind of mental breakdown and need help. Lisa says I should take Sophie to a hospital to be examined, but I'm terrified of what might happen. What if they find nothing, and James convinces them I'm the unstable one? What if they give Sophie back to him? What if they do find something? How do I live with the fact that I left my daughter with a monster night after night while she begged me not to go? Right now, Sophie is napping in Lisa's guest room. She hasn't left my side all day. She flinches at every loud noise, keeps asking if Daddy knows where we are. I have to decide what to do next. Should I go to the police? Take her to a hospital? My parents live 3 states away. We could try to go there, but James would probably guess that's where we'd head. The most messed up part is that tiny voice in my head still wondering if I'm overreacting. If Sophie's fears are just nightmares. If James is right and I'm losing it from exhaustion and stress. But then I remember her face on that nanny cam footage. The absolute terror in her eyes. No child reacts like that for no reason. I need to get that footage back somehow. I need proof. I need to know exactly what he was doing to her all those nights I left her screaming for me not to go. The decision to work nights while leaving Sophie with James, that's the one I can't take back. That's the one keeping me awake right now, watching my daughter sleep, jumping at every sound outside, wondering if he's going to find us. Thank you to everyone who responded to my post. I didn't expect it to get so much attention. I'm sitting in Lisa's bathroom typing this while Sophie finally sleeps. It's been 48 hours since we fled our house, and everything has gone from bad to worse. I decided to take Sophie to a children's hospital the morning after we arrived at Lisa's. Not the one where I work, because James would look for us there first. Lisa drove us to one across town. I was paranoid the entire ride, constantly checking the rearview mirror to see if we were being followed. Sophie wouldn't let go of my hand. She kept asking if Daddy was coming to take her away. The way she asked wasn't like a child missing her parent. It was the voice of someone terrified of being found. At the hospital, I told the staff I was concerned about possible abuse. I had to phrase it carefully because Sophie was right there, listening. The triage nurse understood immediately and took us back quickly. They have a special protocol for these cases, designed to protect kids. A child life specialist came and took Sophie to a playroom while I spoke with the doctor. Dr. Evans was kind, not judgmental at all, even when I broke down crying trying to explain everything. I told her about the night shifts, Sophie's screaming, her hiding in small spaces, the nanny cam footage I partially saw before it vanished. She asked if Sophie had disclosed anything specific about what James did to her. I said no, just that he hurt her and gave her bad dreams. Dr. Evans explained that's common. Young kids often don't have the words to describe what's happening to them. The hospital called in a special team. A social worker named Paul arrived, with a calm voice and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of too many sad stories. There was a detective too, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. They interviewed me separately while a pediatrician examined Sophie. I kept wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was crazy for suspecting this, if I was destroying our lives over something that might be nothing. When the pediatrician came back, my heart stopped beating for a moment. She said there was no obvious physical trauma or signs of sexual abuse, but Sophie had some concerning bruising on her upper arms and back. The pattern was consistent with being grabbed roughly. There was also a small burn on her inner thigh that Sophie wouldn't explain. It wasn't the definitive proof I'd hoped for. It wasn't enough to say for certain that James had been hurting her, but it was something. The doctor said the bruising pattern was suspicious, especially combined with Sophie's behavior. That's when everything spiraled out of control. James showed up at the hospital somehow. I don't know how he found us. Maybe he called around to hospitals. Maybe he tracked my phone. But suddenly he was there in the waiting area, talking to the front desk staff, looking worried and distraught, the perfect image of a concerned father. I was in a consultation room with Paul and the detective when a nurse came in to tell us Sophie's father had arrived and was demanding to see his daughter. My whole body went cold, like ice water had been poured over me. Paul went out to speak with him while the detective stayed with me. I could hear James's voice down the hall, getting louder, more insistent. He was saying I had taken Sophie without permission, that I'd been acting erratically for weeks, that he was worried about our safety. The detective watched me closely, asking if there was any truth to what James was saying. She asked if I had permission to take Sophie, if I'd been having mental health issues, if I'd been struggling at work. I tried to explain, but everything coming out of my mouth sounded insane, even to me. Yes, I took Sophie without telling James. Yes, I'd been stressed and exhausted from work. Yes, I'd left my shift early without permission. Yes, James had always been a good father before this, or so I thought. Yes, Sophie had been having behavioral issues. Yes, I had no proof beyond what I'd partially seen on a nanny cam that I couldn't access anymore. Paul came back with a tense expression. He said James had filed a police report for kidnapping that morning when he woke up to find us gone. He said James had brought medical records showing I'd been prescribed sleep aids last year for insomnia. He said James was claiming I'd been experiencing paranoid thoughts and mood swings for months. My mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. How did he have my medical records? I did get prescribed Ambien last year, but I only took it a handful of times because it made me feel groggy. I never mentioned paranoia to my doctor. James must have, I don't know, accessed my patient portal somehow? Made it up entirely? I couldn't think straight. Paul said they needed to interview Sophie alone, as was standard procedure. I nodded, feeling like a zombie, disconnected from my own body. They wouldn't let James see her yet, at least, which was a small relief. While Sophie was being interviewed, James was allowed to come speak to me with Paul and the detective present. He walked in looking so normal, concerned, slightly sad but composed, like a loving husband worried about his family. I barely recognized him. This wasn't the James who had been standing over Sophie's bed in that nanny cam footage. He sat across from me and did this thing with his eyes like he was holding back tears, a performance for the room. He said he was so relieved we were safe, that he'd been worried sick. He said he couldn't understand why I'd taken Sophie in the middle of the night without telling him. He asked what was going on with me, his voice dripping with fake concern. I just stared at him, unable to find words. The detective asked about the bruises on Sophie's arms and the burn on her thigh. James didn't even flinch. He said Sophie had fallen off the playground equipment at the park last week, and he showed them pictures on his phone of Sophie at the park from last Saturday. He said the small burn probably happened when Sophie was helping him cook breakfast. She'd accidentally touched the pan. He even had a picture of them making pancakes together from Sunday morning, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about their daddy-daughter breakfast tradition. His answers were perfectly reasonable, documented with casual photos a normal dad would take. He made me sound like the crazy one, the one blowing things out of proportion. That's when James pulled out his phone and showed them his own copy of our nanny cam footage from the night before, the footage I couldn't access anymore. My heart nearly stopped. The video showed exactly what I had started to see, James coming into Sophie's room, sitting on her bed. But then it continued. It showed him tucking her in gently. It showed him reading her a bedtime story. It showed Sophie still crying a little, but gradually calming down. It showed James kissing her forehead and leaving the room. It looked completely normal, completely innocent. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. That's not what I saw. That's not what was happening. He must have edited it, replaced it, something. But how could I prove that? How could I explain that the video he had wasn't what I started to see? James told them I'd been under tremendous stress from work. He said he'd been begging me to cut back my hours for months. He said he was worried I was having some kind of mental breakdown. He even started crying, crocodile tears streaming down his face, saying he just wanted to help me get better, for our family to be whole again. Paul and the detective exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Then Sophie came back with a female officer. She saw James and froze completely in the doorway, her body rigid with fear. Then she ran to me, climbed into my lap, and buried her face in my shoulder, refusing to look at him. That had to mean something, right? The way she reacted to seeing him? The detective noticed it too. I could tell by the way her eyes narrowed, but James just looked sad and said, "See? This is what I'm talking about. She's feeding off your anxiety. You've made her afraid of me." They asked to speak to Sophie alone again. I didn't want to let her go, but they insisted it was necessary. James and I waited in separate rooms. I texted Lisa what was happening, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. She offered to come to the hospital, but I told her to stay away. I didn't want James to target her too. After what felt like an eternity, Paul came back. He said Sophie wasn't disclosing any abuse. He said she was confused and scared, that she mentioned having bad dreams but couldn't or wouldn't explain what they were about. He said she missed her daddy, but was also afraid of him. His exact words were, "We don't have enough to substantiate abuse allegations at this time." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. He said they couldn't prevent James from having contact with Sophie based on what they had right now. I must have made some kind of sound, because Paul quickly added that they were still investigating. They'd be making home visits. They wanted us to attend family counseling. They were taking it seriously, he assured me. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said that given the circumstances, they were concerned about my mental state and decision-making. He said if I continued to make unfounded accusations or tried to prevent James from seeing Sophie, I could risk losing custody myself. James was allowed to see Sophie briefly under supervision before leaving. He didn't push it when she wouldn't hug him. He just talked to her softly, telling her he missed her, asking if she was ready to come home. She looked at me with these huge, terrified eyes, and I just broke inside, a piece of me shattering. Somehow, we ended up with this bizarre compromise. Sophie and I could stay somewhere else temporarily while the investigation continued, but I had to disclose where we were. James would have supervised visits starting tomorrow. We'd begin family counseling next week. I had to return to work or take official leave. I had to agree not to leave the state. It was either that, or they were going to hold an emergency custody hearing where James would likely get temporary custody, given my erratic behavior and lack of concrete evidence. So now we're back at Lisa's apartment. I had to tell James where we are. He knows her address. He's coming tomorrow at 2 p.m. for his first supervised visit. Paul will be here to monitor, but I'm still terrified beyond words. Sophie is finally sleeping after crying herself into exhaustion. She made me check under the bed, in the closet behind the shower curtain. She made me promise I wouldn't leave her. She wrapped her little fingers around mine as she fell asleep, holding on like I was her lifeline. I've been going through my phone, trying to figure out how James could have accessed my medical records, how he could have altered the nanny cam footage. I found out he installed a family locator app on my phone months ago, in case of emergencies. That's probably how he found us at the hospital. I deleted it immediately. I also discovered all these strange text conversations with my mom and friends where it looks like I've been complaining about stress and paranoid thoughts for months. But I never sent those texts. I never had those conversations. Yet there they are in my message history, some going back almost a year. Messages I supposedly sent at times I know I was working or sleeping. I'm afraid to sleep. Afraid James will somehow get in. Afraid they'll take Sophie away from me. Afraid no one will believe me because I'm starting to question my own reality. The nanny cam footage he showed looked so normal, so innocent. What if I did imagine it? What if I am having some kind of breakdown? But then Sophie whimpers in her sleep, and I know. I know what I saw starting to happen on that camera. I know my daughter. I know she's terrified of her father for a reason. Lisa says I need a lawyer, that this is beyond what we can handle alone. She has a friend who's a family attorney and we're going to call her tomorrow. But lawyers cost money and James controls our bank accounts. I have my own personal account with some savings, but it's not much. I checked my work email. I already have a warning for leaving my shift early. My supervisor wants to meet tomorrow to discuss recent performance issues. Issues I didn't even know existed until now. There are complaint forms dating back weeks about medication errors I never made, patient interactions that never happened. I feel like I'm drowning. Like everything I thought was solid is actually quicksand pulling me under. The worst part is that tiny voice still whispering in my head. Maybe he's right. Maybe you are losing it. Maybe you did see something that wasn't there. But then I look at Sophie's bruises. At the small circular burn on her inner thigh that looks nothing like an accidental touch to a pan. At the way she flinches when doors close too loudly. At how she whispers, "Please don't make me go with Daddy." I don't know what to do. I don't know who to trust anymore. James has turned everything upside down so efficiently that I'm questioning my own sanity. The systems that should protect us are now scrutinizing me as much as him. I'm going to try to get some sleep while Sophie is resting. I'm dreading tomorrow, dreading the supervised visit, dreading what comes next. If anyone has been through something like this, please tell me what to do. How do you fight someone who's already convinced everyone you're crazy? How do you protect your child when no one believes there's anything to protect them from? And if anyone knows how to recover deleted nanny cam footage or prove messages were sent from your phone by someone else, please tell me. That might be our only hope. It's been 4 days since my last update. I'm typing this from a hospital chair, watching Sophie sleep, hooked up to monitors. Everything has spiraled so far out of control, I can barely think straight. The supervised visit with James happened. Paul, the social worker, came to Lisa's apartment 30 minutes early to explain the process. He said he'd be present the entire time and would intervene if necessary. He wanted to observe the natural interaction between James and Sophie to establish a baseline for their relationship. Sophie had been having panic attacks all morning, not typical tantrums, but full-on hyperventilating, struggling to breathe. I had to rock her like a baby to calm her down. She kept saying she didn't want to see Daddy, that she didn't want the bad dreams to come back. When Paul arrived, Sophie hid under Lisa's bed and refused to come out. It took 20 minutes of gentle coaxing to get her into the living room. Paul noticed her fear and made notes on his clipboard. That had to count for something, right? A child this terrified isn't making it up. James arrived exactly at 2 p.m., looking like the perfect father, clean-shaven, carrying Sophie's favorite stuffed animal she'd left at home. He had this gentle smile that made my stomach churn, because I knew it was a lie. Paul introduced himself formally and explained the rules. A 2-hour visit, he would remain present, no physical discipline, respect Sophie's boundaries. Sophie was sitting next to me on the couch, pressing herself against my side so hard it hurt. When James walked in, she went completely still. Not crying, not speaking, just frozen, like a deer in headlights. The first hour was excruciating. James sat on the floor, trying to engage Sophie with toys and questions. Sophie refused to leave my side, her body tense. I tried not to show how much I wanted to grab her and run, but it was torture. James suggested Sophie show him her temporary bedroom, saying maybe they could read a story together. Sophie shook her head violently, her eyes wide with panic. Paul intervened, suggesting they all stay in the living room, noting that transitions can be hard for children in stressful situations. Then James did something that chilled me to the bone. He looked directly at Sophie and said, "Remember our special game? The one where you get to be the princess in the tower? I have a new story about the princess I could tell you." Sophie started trembling against me, her body vibrating with fear. She whispered, "No games, no princess games." I asked James what he meant by princess game. He smiled calmly and said it was just a bedtime story thing they did when I was at work. He'd tell stories about a princess locked in a tower who had to be very quiet so the dragon wouldn't hear her. Paul asked Sophie if she liked the princess stories. She shook her head, still trembling, her face pale. Paul made another note on his clipboard. Halfway through the visit, I had to use the bathroom. I didn't want to leave Sophie, but I couldn't hold it any longer. I told Paul I'd be right back. Sophie started panicking, clinging to me, her nails digging into my arms. James said soothingly that it was okay, that Daddy was here, that nothing bad would happen. I went as fast as I couldn't have been gone more than 2 minutes. When I came back, Sophie was still on the couch, but something was different. She was sitting perfectly still, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor with a vacant expression, completely silent. James was across the room, talking casually with Paul about the weather, as if nothing was wrong. I rushed to Sophie, asking if she was okay. She didn't respond, didn't even look at me, just kept staring at the floor, her eyes empty. I touched her shoulder, and she flinched so violently she nearly fell off the couch. Paul noticed immediately and came over to check on her. He asked Sophie what happened, but she wouldn't speak, wouldn't make eye contact. James looked appropriately concerned, saying maybe she was overtired, suggesting they end the visit early. As soon as James left, Sophie collapsed into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably, but she still wouldn't say what happened in those 2 minutes I was gone. Paul stayed for another hour, trying to get her to talk, but she refused, just kept whispering, "No princess games," over and over like a broken record. That night, Sophie wouldn't sleep. She wouldn't even lie down. She sat in the corner of Lisa's guest room with her back to the wall, watching the door, until she literally passed out from exhaustion around 4 a.m. When I tried to move her to the bed, she woke up screaming, thrashing in my arms. I held her until she calmed down, but it broke my heart all over again. The next morning, Lisa helped me find a lawyer who agreed to meet us that afternoon. Sophie was still practically catatonic, barely speaking, jumping at every sound. I was terrified to leave her, but Lisa offered to stay with her while I met with the lawyer, promising she wouldn't leave Sophie alone for a second. The lawyer's name was Mark. He was an older man with kind eyes behind thick glasses. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, then said, "You're being systematically gaslit." He explained that what James was doing, creating a false medical history, manipulating digital evidence, establishing a narrative of my mental instability, was textbook preparation for a custody battle. He said abusers often set these things up months or even years in advance. When I asked what we could do, he said that without hard evidence, it would be my word against James's. And James had already created a paper trail that made my word look unreliable. He said we needed to focus on Sophie, getting her to feel safe enough to disclose what was happening, getting her evaluated by specialists experienced in child abuse cases. I felt so defeated, like the ground was crumbling beneath me. Mark must have seen it on my face because he leaned forward and said, "But there's something that doesn't add up in James's perfect plan. If he's trying to make you look unstable to get custody, why is he doing things that terrify Sophie so obviously? An experienced manipulator would be more careful. It's almost like he wants her to be afraid, but can't help himself from—" Mark stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowing. He asked what James did for work before he was laid off. I told him he was a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm. Mark asked if James had ever been investigated at work, if he'd left under unusual circumstances. I didn't think so, but I realized I only knew what James had told me about his job. On my way back to Lisa's, my supervisor called. She said she'd been trying to reach me, that we needed to discuss my employment status immediately. Her tone was cold, professional, not like the woman who'd thrown me a baby shower 3 years ago. She said there had been multiple complaints about my conduct with patients, medication errors, showing up to shifts impaired. All lies, all completely fabricated. I tried to explain, but she cut me off, saying I was suspended pending an investigation. She said they'd been lenient because of my previous good record, but the recent incidents were too serious to ignore. She told me to turn in my badge. I was still reeling from that call when I got back to Lisa's apartment. I found Lisa sitting on the couch, looking shell-shocked. Sophie was napping, finally sleeping after nearly 24 hours awake. Lisa said something happened while I was gone. She'd been sitting with Sophie, trying to get her to eat something, when Sophie suddenly asked if the princess game was real or pretend. Lisa, not knowing what that meant, said she wasn't familiar with any princess game. Sophie stared at her for a long time, then whispered, "If I tell about the tower and the dragon will burn everyone up. Daddy said so." Lisa asked what happened in the tower, but Sophie shut down completely, refusing to speak again. She just curled into a ball on the couch until she fell asleep from exhaustion. I called Mark immediately. He said this was a significant disclosure and that we needed to document it. He suggested I take Sophie back to the children's hospital and ask for the same team if possible. He warned me not to prompt her or ask leading questions, just create safe opportunities for her to talk. So I took Sophie back to the hospital. Dr. Evans was on shift and recognized us immediately. I explained what happened during the supervised visit and what Sophie had said to Lisa about the princess game. Dr. Evans' expression darkened, and she made some calls, assembling the same team from before. They interviewed Sophie again, this time with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. Sophie still wouldn't talk much, but she kept mentioning the princess game, the tower, and the dragon in whispers. The psychologist asked if she could draw a picture of the princess game. Sophie refused at first, then suddenly agreed. What she drew made my heart stop. It was a stick figure girl in what looked like a small enclosed space, like a box or a room. Outside was a larger figure surrounded by angry red scribbles, the crayon pressed so hard it tore through the paper in places. The psychologist asked who was in the picture. Sophie pointed to the small figure and said, "Princess." She pointed to the larger figure and said, "Dragon." Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she added, "But sometimes Daddy is the dragon." They asked if she could explain more about the game, but Sophie shut down again, staring vacantly at the floor. The psychologist signaled that they should stop pushing. As we were leaving the interview room, Sophie suddenly grabbed her stomach and threw up. I thought it was just stress at first, but she kept vomiting, unable to stop. Her skin felt hot to the touch. Dr. Evans checked her temperature, 103.4, way too high. They admitted her immediately and ran tests. They found an infection they couldn't immediately identify and put her on IV antibiotics. That's when James showed up again. Somehow he knew Sophie had been admitted. He stormed into the hospital room, demanding to know what was happening with his daughter. I lost it completely, screaming at him to get out. Security had to come and escort him away. Paul was called, and the whole situation spiraled into chaos. In the midst of it all, Sophie had a seizure from the high fever. Watching her tiny body convulse on the hospital bed while medical staff rushed around her is something I'll never forget as long as I live. They stabilized her, but they had to move her to the intensive care unit. The doctors are baffled by the infection. They can't figure out where it came from or why it's so severe. They're trying different antibiotics, running more tests. When Sophie's awake, she keeps asking if the dragon is gone, if she's safe in the tower now. James is being allowed to visit under strict supervision, and he plays the devastated father perfectly, tears in his eyes, voice trembling. This morning, he cornered me in the hospital cafeteria when no one else was around. His perfect concerned father mask slipped for just a second. He leaned in close and whispered, "You should have stayed at work like you were supposed to. Some things you're not meant to see." Mark is trying to get an emergency court order to prevent James from having any contact with Sophie. He says her disclosure about the princess game and the dragon, combined with her reaction during the supervised visit, is enough to raise serious concerns with the judge. But the court system moves slowly, and Sophie needs protection now. The doctors just came in with more test results. The infection is getting worse despite the antibiotics. They're bringing in specialists, talking about possible causes. They asked about any medication Sophie might have been given at home, any chemicals she might have been exposed to. I don't know what James did to our daughter. I don't know if this infection is related to him or just horrible timing. I can't even write it. I can't even think it. Sophie's fever spiked again an hour ago. She was delirious, thrashing in the hospital bed, fighting against the nurses trying to help her. She kept screaming about the dragon, about the burning, about how it hurts when Daddy makes her drink the special princess medicine. Those words, special princess medicine, sent ice through my veins. I asked the doctors to test for poisoning. They looked skeptical, but agreed to run additional toxicology screens given the circumstances. Just got the preliminary results back. They found traces of antifreeze in her system. Fucking antifreeze. My 4-year-old daughter has ethylene glycol poisoning. The doctor said if we hadn't caught it when we did, if we'd waited even another day, she could have died. James has disappeared. He left the hospital after his last supervised visit and no one can find him. The police are looking for him now. Lisa brought me clean clothes and stayed for hours, holding my hand while I cried. Mark is working on emergency protective orders. Paul seems shocked, keeps saying there were no indications of this level of abuse. Like that helps anything now. What kind of monster poisons his own child? What was he trying to do? Kill her? Make her sick enough to be hospitalized so he could play the concerned father? Or was it just another sick game? Another way to control her? I can't leave Sophie's side, not for a minute. Not even to use the bathroom without someone watching her. I'm terrified James will come back to finish what he started. The police found something at our house during a search. Cleaning supplies and Sophie's favorite princess cup hidden in the back of her closet where she wouldn't see it. Residue of what looks like antifreeze mixed with juice. They're testing it now to confirm. Mark says with the poisoning evidence, we'll get full protection for Sophie. He says no judge would allow James anywhere near her after this. He says when she's well enough, we can go stay with my parents until the case is resolved. Edit. The police just called. They found James at a bus station trying to leave town. He's in custody now, being questioned about the poisoning, about the files they found on his computer, about what the hell he's been doing to our daughter. Sophie's asleep again, peaceful for the first time in days. The antidote is working. The doctors are cautiously optimistic, saying children are resilient, that she can recover from unimaginable trauma with the right support. I want to believe them. I need to believe them. I need to believe I haven't lost my daughter, even though I got her back. I need to believe we can rebuild some kind of life after this nightmare. If you're a parent reading this, please listen when your child tries to tell you something is wrong, even if they don't have the words, even if it seems impossible, even if the person they're afraid of is someone you trust with your whole heart. Don't make my mistake. Don't let your child scream for you not to leave them and walk out the door anyway. Because sometimes the monsters aren't under the bed or in the closet. Sometimes they're right beside you, smiling, while they plot to destroy everything you love. 3 weeks have passed since my last update. Sophie's out of the hospital now, and we're staying at my parents' house, 3 states away from where it all happened. We have permanent restraining orders against James. We're trying to rebuild something that feels like safety, though it's fragile. Sophie's physical recovery has been better than expected. Her kidneys are functioning almost normally again. The doctors say kids are resilient physically, that their bodies can bounce back from trauma. I wish their minds could heal as easily. She still wakes up screaming in the middle of the night. She still checks every closet, under every bed, every corner of every room. She still whispers about the dragon and the tower, her voice small and trembling. She won't be alone in any room, not even for a moment. She follows me to the bathroom, watches the door while I shower, her eyes wide and alert. Her therapist says this hypervigilance is normal after such profound trauma. It might last months, or even years before she feels safe again. I hold her close and promise her I'll never leave her, but I know words alone can't undo what's been done. 3 months later, Sophie's laughter echoes through my parents' backyard, a sound I wasn't sure I'd ever hear again. She's chasing a butterfly, her small hands waving in the air, a fleeting smile breaking through the cautious expression she's worn since we escaped that nightmare. It's not the carefree giggle of the toddler she was before James's darkness consumed our lives, but it's a start. A fragile, precious start, like a seedling pushing through cracked earth. We've settled into a new routine at my parents' house, far from the memories of our old home. The restraining order against James is permanent now, backed by overwhelming evidence of his actions, antifreeze in Sophie's princess cup, the manipulated nanny cam footage recovered by a forensic technician Mark hired, and the chilling files found on James's laptop. The police investigation uncovered more than I could have imagined. A calculated plan spanning months, from falsifying my medical records to planting complaints at my workplace. He'd been systematically unraveling my credibility while orchestrating Sophie's terror, all to secure custody and control. The why still escapes me, and maybe it always will. Some monsters don't have reasons that make sense to anyone else. James's trial is ongoing. He's been charged with attempted murder, child endangerment, and a slew of other counts related to his actions. Mark says the evidence is airtight, and the prosecution is pushing for the maximum sentence. I don't attend the hearings. My focus is on Sophie. But Mark keeps me updated with detailed reports. I don't care about revenge. I just want him gone from our lives forever, locked away where he can't hurt us again. Sophie's therapy is helping, though progress is slow and uneven. Her therapist, Dr. Patel, specializes in childhood trauma and uses play therapy to help Sophie process what happened. Last week, Sophie drew a picture of a princess breaking out of a tower, the dragon lying defeated at her feet, its body crossed out with heavy black lines. She pointed to the princess and said, "That's me, Mommy." My heart swelled with pride and broke with sorrow at the same time. She's fighting just like I am, with a strength I didn't know a child could have. I'm fighting too, not just for her, but for myself. I've started counseling to deal with the guilt that still wakes me up at night, replaying every moment I ignored Sophie's pleas, every night I walked out the door. My therapist says guilt is a natural response to trauma, but it can't define our future. I'm trying to believe her, though it's hard some days. I've also been cleared to return to work, though I'm taking it slow, picking up part-time shifts at a clinic near my parents' house. The hospital investigated the false complaints against me and found no evidence to support them. My supervisor even apologized, though the sting of being doubted lingers like a bruise. Lisa has been a lifeline through all of this, visiting when she can and sending care packages filled with Sophie's favorite snacks and picture books. She's also helping me navigate the financial mess James left behind. He'd drained our joint accounts before his arrest, but my personal savings and my parents' support are keeping us afloat for now. Mark's friend, a pro bono financial advisor, is helping me rebuild our finances step by step. The hardest part is watching Sophie navigate her new world, a world where safety is uncertain. She's starting to trust again, little by little, like a bird testing its wings. She's made a friend at her new preschool, a quiet girl named Ellie who loves butterflies as much as Sophie does. They hold hands during circle time, and seeing that tiny connection feels like a miracle after everything. But the fear is still there. When a door slams, when a man's voice gets too loud, when she wakes up from a nightmare about the dragon, her screams piercing the quiet night. Dr. Patel says healing isn't linear, and I see that every day. Some days, Sophie clings to me like she's still hiding in that guest bathroom tub, her body trembling. Other days, she asks to plant flowers with Grandma or bake cookies with Grandpa, and I catch glimpses of the girl she might become, the girl she was before the darkness. I hold on to those moments like lifelines. I've learned to listen, not just to Sophie's words, but to her silences, her flinches, her drawings, the way her body speaks when her voice can't. I've learned that trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered, but not impossible to rebuild with patience and love. I've learned that monsters don't always look like monsters, and that the systems meant to protect us can fail when the truth is buried under a web of lies. But I've also learned that love, fierce, unrelenting love, can pull you through the darkest places, even when you feel like you're drowning. We're not whole yet, but we're here, breathing, fighting. Sophie's hand in mine, her sleepy murmurs as I tuck her in, the way she checks under the bed but then crawls into my lap for a bedtime story. These are the threads we're weaving into a new life. It's not the life I imagined for us, but it's ours, and it's enough for now. We're survivors, Sophie and I, and as long as she's safe, as long as she knows I'll never leave her again, we'll keep fighting toward the light, one step at a time. Final thoughts for you. If you're still grappling with the weight of this, know that you did everything you could with the information you had at the time. You listened to Sophie when it mattered most, and you saved her life. The road ahead will be hard, but you're not alone in this fight. Lean on your support system, Lisa, Mark, your parents, and keep fighting for Sophie's healing and your own. If you need specific resources, I suggest looking into organizations like the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, NCTSN, for trauma-informed care, or RAIN for legal and emotional support for survivors of abuse. For recovering the nanny cam footage or proving the texts were manipulated, a digital forensics expert like the one Mark connected you with is your best bet. Many specialize in cloud data recovery and can trace unauthorized access to devices. You're stronger than you know, and Sophie is lucky to have you as her mom. Keep holding on, keep fighting. If you ever need to talk or need guidance on next steps, I'm here for you. Thank you all for your support and for listening to our story. Your strength and kindness have helped us find hope in the darkest moments, and we're grateful beyond words.